I'm in the green room. People are patting me on the back, going, "Oh my God, you're going to open for Tom Jones in Vegas." I go, "I can't open for Tom Jones in Vegas. I got no fucking act."
Welcome, friends and fans, to another edition of GalaxyCon Live, where we are bringing the convention experience directly to you. And today we are indeed going back to the crypt with our amazing guest. So without further ado, let's go down to the graveyard and see who we find. Our guest today is an actor and comedian whose body of work includes the new Looney Tunes, Disney's Pocahontas, and First and 10. Today joins us to discuss his career as well as giving voice to the Cryptkeeper in Tales from the Crypt and the animated version Tales from the Cryptkeeper. Please welcome John Kassir.
Thanks, Patty. I have to tell you, just because more people than not call me John Kassir, it's John Kassir.
Kassir, okay.
Okay. No, don't even fret it. It's the most common thing. The people either spell it right and say it wrong, or they spell it wrong and say it right. So it's been the bane of my career.
I pride myself on really getting the pronunciations right. And the weird thing is I was just talking to some people the other day. Oh yeah, John. Yeah. So lesson learned. Well, thank you.
No problem, my friend. Funny story. Well, it wasn't funny for Pat Boone, but I did. I did one of those live telethons, like the MS, Jerry Lewis telethon or something, as a stand-up, and he kept asking me before we went on. It was Pat Boone and oh my gosh, what was her name? Oh, she was great. She was on all those soaps, nighttime soaps. Donna Mills, I think.
Yeah.
And they were the co-hosts, and he kept going, "So how do you say it?" I said, "Kassir, like Kassir's here." And he kept going, "Okay, John Kassir." So he goes out live on TV and goes, "And here he comes, John Kassir." And I come out and I go, "Thank you." And it's Kassir, Mr. Bone. And Donna Mills does like one of these and looks at him like, "Oh, he's not going to like that." And he sat there for a second and then went, "Ah," because he had the egg on his face for just that moment. But I was just like, "Oh."
Well, feel free to call me Pity or anything else you want to do.
All right, Pity. It's a pity, Patty.
You still got it. You really do.
It's thank God I can still make a living doing this. I love it. I started in the theater. I was doing theater when I was a kid. I loved it. I loved being on stage. I would do circuses in my basement, and I'd have like my mother's clothesline, and I'd pretend to do a tightrope walk on it. Of course, it'd be on the ground. I'd pretend to be on a unicycle and dress up like clowns and stuff like that. And I'd charge a penny to get in. My friends would all the kids in the neighborhood would come spend a penny, but then I'd go buy the penny candy and charge 5 cents for it, just like the movie theaters do now.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
So I've been making a living doing this my entire life, but moving on into television and stand-up comedy and that kind of thing has been great over the years. But as you get older, there are just less parts for you. And of course, getting the opportunity to continue to work as a voiceover actor all these years has been great, because you're pretty much not typed out by how you look, your age, or even whether you're human or not.
Yeah.
Some of my biggest roles over the last couple of years. The biggest Disney roles I've been doing over the last number of years were Miko the raccoon, Elliot and Pete's Dragon. and Ulysses and Flora and Ulysses, which I just did this last year. They kind of know me for animals. So
Yeah.
And of course all these creatures. I never would have got to play Deadpool, if it was on camera. Look at these guys. Let's go to the gun show. Ryan Reynolds, step over.
And you had to do Deadpool in video game form, so you had to do all those efforts and everything else. So it's stuff that he didn't have to do. So you did the marathon performance of Deadpool.
It's true.
So absolutely,
they didn't let me get away with the cursing though, because it's like, kids are gonna be playing this game. I was like, oh come on, this character is like I was so glad to see what they did with the movies because it was so much more what I had thought it would be.
Yeah, they really did, and it
yeah.
looks like they're gonna keep that vibe to it under the unified Marvel management. So we'll leave it at that. So what? So I'd like to go back a little bit because again, you've really had a fantastic body of work.
Thank you.
I mentioned First and 10, which is a show that is undervalued because it was one of those early HBO shows when they were really experimenting with original programming and everything else, and we wouldn't have got. I always tell people we wouldn't have gotten like Sopranos and Deadwood and everything else without those 80s shows like First and 10, The Hitchhiker, and stuff like that.
Dream On.
Dream On, yeah.
Dream On. These were all shows that I did. Let's see. How do I begin? Well, it's funny because, like I said, I was doing theater and I got my first off-Broadway show early in my career, right out of college. One of my professors was well-known in the New York stage community, and he got this big off-Broadway show that he was going to direct, and he offered me a role in it, and I moved to New York. I was getting paid $175 a week, which even in 1980 was shit. And I was making more money street performing than I was in the theater. Over the years, getting some theater and realizing how little it paid, and I had done sketch comedy. I was in a part of a sketch comedy group that came out of Baltimore, where I grew up and where I went to college at Towson University, called Animal Crackers. And we were playing the clubs in New York and really hadn't done much stand-up comedy. But I got a call one day from a friend saying, hey, they're auditioning for this musical about stand-up comics, and they want people who are actors / comics / and so I kind of took my street act into the audition, and they were like, oh, this is the guy, and I got the part. It was a big hit off Broadway. It starred Scott Bakula and myself, and a guy named Jerry Colker, who was the writer. And it was a big hit, and people assumed that I was a stand-up comic because here I was playing this stand-up comedian. And it was the first year of Star Search, and they were towards the end of the season, and they were about to go into the second season, and they needed somebody to come on. They were about to go into their semifinals and stuff, and they were like, we need you. We want you. They called and they said, hey, we want you to be on the show. And I'm like, what, as a singer? I said, I'm in a musical. I can sing, but I'm no Sam Harris. People who know Sam Harris know that he was blowing people away on that show.
Yeah.
And so they asked me to be on the show. They go, and I'm like, a singer? They go, no, a stand-up comic. I go, I'm not really a stand-up comic. It's a part I'm playing in the show. And they're like, well, you can win $100,000. I'm like, fuck, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Have you seen my act? Yeah. You can call me John Kassir.
Oh, shit. I don't owe you
$100,000,
do I?
No, it was funny because the first time I was on, you have to write out your name phonetically for Ed McMahon to say it properly. So I wrote John Kassir. So he's from New York. I'm from Baltimore. John Kassir, because it was spelled out like CUSEER. Kassir. It was very funny. But I of course went on and won. I remember about halfway through the season, I was already guaranteed. I had won enough to be a guaranteed spot on the in the semifinals.
Yeah.
And they had Tom Jones on, and he's like, I like that comic. He gets to open for me in Vegas. And everybody's like, I'm in the green room. People are patting me on the back, going, oh my God, you're gonna open for Tom Jones in Vegas. They go, I can't open for Tom Jones in Vegas. I got no fucking act. I've been writing these 2-minute sketches. Every time I won, I had to come up with a new sketch. And I was like, stealing from my street act and stealing from my,
I have so been there because I've done stand-up and I did sketch. And yeah, I reached a point where it was like, I was compressing my 5 per-person sketches. How can I do this in a story and chunk? And yeah, I'm with you. And I remember when Larry the Cable Guy hit, I said it took me 12 years to develop my 20 minutes. And then when I came and hit overnight, suddenly I'm like, I don't have another 12 years to come up with another 20 minutes. So I absolutely sympathize.
Oh my God, I had to get my ass into the clubs, and I created this, and I obviously wasn't a guy telling jokes. I was doing like, the Wizard of Oz in 2.5 minutes.
Mhm.
As coroner, I must concur. I thoroughly examined her. Dun, doo, 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 doo. Oh, Rio, yo. What's them? What's them? That's the castle of the Wicked Witch. Oh, Dorothy's in that awful place. Oh, I hate to think of her in there. Fellas, we've got to get her out. I got a plan how to get in there, and you're gonna lead us. All right, I'll go in here for Dorothy. Wicked Witch or no Wicked Witch. Gods or no gods, it's just one thing I want you fellas to do. What's that? Talk me out of it. Anyway.
Good thing you brought the gun.
Yes, exactly.
Which they never used. I was winning trivia contests with it all the time. What was it? He had a gun. No, he had a gun.
He had a gun. But so I dreamed up this act of a guy who was addicted to television, and I would actually get up on stage like it was a AA meeting. And so I'm a tubaholic, and people, being in LA, people would be like, "Hi, John," it's just like being in a meeting. And and then I'd try not to slip into TV shows, and I'd channel all these TV shows and voices and characters and that kind of thing. And my first series, First and 10, my first HBO, and as you know, HBO, you were saying HBO was just starting to wind up in people's homes. And First and 10 was their first.
It was called Home Box Office.
That's right, Home Box Office.
Na 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 na
na na na.
Kids pretending they were flying in the sequence.
Yeah, right. No, I used to tickle this girl that I was seeing, and whenever that music would come on, she'd giggle. It would always wind up in sex. So it was, thank you, HBO.
That's better than my Superman fantasy. All right, you go.
We were both in tights, though. But that I was doing First and 10, and when they and I had had done some recurring on Dream On and some other stuff for HBO, so they thought of me to come audition, to play the Cryptkeeper. When they started looking for somebody for it, and they had called my agents, and I was like, and I had collected the comic books as a kid, so this was huge to me that they were going to turn this into a show. Of course, I thought, with the pseudo popularity of HBO and being cable and being horror wasn't as popular as it is now, and all these different things, that it was just going to wind up kind of a cult classic for people like me. And so I was more excited by the fact that I got to go down to Kevin Yeager's studio and see what he was working on, having done Chucky and Freddy Krueger and all these different things. I walked into his shop, which was out in the middle of like one of the deepest, darkest parts of the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah.
And, there was some other voice actors and comics and people there auditioning, and they're sitting there looking at the copy going, "Be careful what you ask for. You may get it." They're like, "Oh, this stuff sucks." And you're sitting there going, "No, you don't understand. This is Shakespeare to the Cryptkeeper."
Exactly.
Alfred Hitchcock said that, that puns were the highest form of alliteration, And so, as I'm looking at the puppet with its rotting teeth, and he had all different versions of them. He had had one of them had a nose, and he had tried to be creating a Cryptkeeper, and this is actually a later model Cryptkeeper.
Yeah,
the original one, they didn't give him much budget, so he was using spare parts. A lot of people know this story by now, but a lot of people don't, that these were Chucky eyes that he used. They had spare Chucky eyes, and different servos, the little motors they used to work model airplanes and stuff.
When you saw the did you see like a bunch of original like prototype ones that were never used?
Yeah,
so
they had like, maybe like at this point, maybe they had narrowed it down to 3-4 when you came into the studio that you got to see.
So I'm curious if they had like, because the Cryptkeeper in the comics started out looking kind of normal, and then he kind of rotted and became what you voiced him as too. So I'm curious if there was sort of almost human version at first.
Well, from what I remember, Kevin had said that his concept of the Crypt Keeper was kind of a combination of the Crypt Keeper, the Old Witch, and the Vault Keeper. He's trying to make this one character.
Sure.
And and then he took his genius and put it into that image.
Yeah.
Of course, I remember auditioning for him. As you hear the Crypt Keeper now, fast and funny and stand-up-ish and all that stuff, and I'm doing it for Kevin, and he'd probably heard a bunch of people and they're like doing whatever they were doing, and he
welcome kiddies to the crypt.
Right, the shadow knows.
Yeah, or they're trying to do sacrilege or something. Welcome children to the vault of the crypt.
But so he didn't even have really a sound studio. He just had a boombox with a little lav mic hooked to it.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there doing it for him, and he's sitting there like this, and all of a sudden he's like this. Yeah. And it's making me laugh. So I'm like going, okay, the Crypt Keeper laughs at his own jokes, and I'm rolling with it, and I'm adding more puns myself to what they wrote and making him laugh. And the next thing I know, the very next day, he has me doing it for Joel Silver or Richard Donner, two of the biggest guys in the industry at that time.
Yes.
And to this day, I was sad to hear the passing of Richard Donner. He was not only amazing director and talent, but just a wonderful man to work with. And
so I've heard. I mean, he was an actor himself, so he had that rapport. He could talk to you in a way totally. You could understand.
You could feel the rumbling of his voice, how coming down the hallway. I mean, he was amazing. But I did it for them in their what was a little office from off the set of Tales from the Crypt, which was again in even a darker, deeper part of the valley. And they had like a little trailer set up for them or something with paneling with nothing on the walls. And I'm sitting there doing it for two like the biggest guys, in the business, and they're going, great, we'll see you on the set. And you're sitting there going, yeah, right, I'll believe that when I see it, And of course, 7 years of the show and the movies and record albums and Christmas albums and cartoons and game shows and and on top of it, it launched my voiceover career, which, people had always told me I would have a big voiceover career, but I never, having the talent for it and getting your foot in that door was not an easy thing, especially back then. There weren't that many people doing it, and the people that were doing it were getting hired a lot over and over and over again. Yeah. Now it's saturated with people who want to do it, and it's which is great because it opens the door for a lot of different people. But at the same time, you get a mixed bag of levels of What was like a typical schedule for a season? Was you going weekly and cut in as a per episode, or chunks? The first 3 episodes were done like a movie. And so, we spent a lot of time. And of course, I went into the studio to record with Kevin. And here I'm like, be careful what you ask for. And he's like, no. The puppet's mouth doesn't work that great. We got to, we don't have much budget for it to start with. You're going to have to slow him down. So people are always asking me, how come the Crypt Keeper sounds different in the first season or 2? And I'm like, because he had to talk slower and more ominously because his voice. And but of course, once the show was popular and picked up, and Gil Adler came onto the scene as a showrunner, who had worked up this whole way of shooting the show where they had one camera team working with the director of the next episode while the other one was shooting, and had amazing art directors and people that could make something out of nothing, which I'm sure they all were, if you ask them to this day, they got paid shit to do the show, but it was an amazing show to work on.
it was a bit like fairy tale theater in the early 80s. It was kind of like a hot gig to get, and a lot of people got their director card on that. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the first thing he ever directed was an episode.
Yeah, we had Arnold. You know, a lot of actors wanted the opportunity to direct, and of course, they all had relationships with Joel and Dick
Yep.
and Robert Zemeckis and Walter Hill and David Giler, who had produced Aliens, and I mean, these are the producers on the show. So at first, they were like, telling Gil Adler, like, "How are you going to get stars on this show?" And we were like, "Hey, everybody wants to do something they don't get a chance to do,
Yep.
whether it's comics doing serious acting or serious actors doing comedy or directing." They had Michael Keaton, they had Michael J. Fox, they had
Yeah.
Tom Hanks direct an episode. I mean, we had, then there was, like I did an episode called Oil's Well That Ends Well.
Mhm.
And Paul Abascal, who is amazing, makeup artist and effects guy on his own, wanted the opportunity to direct something, and he had worked with Joel Silver and some of the other people over the years, and they gave him a chance. He did a terrific job, and so it was that opportunity for people to get a chance to do that. But that was the kind of pace they were doing this show at. So
Yeah.
I might have one episode to do, and then a couple of weeks, or I might have, then all of a sudden had to do 2-3 episodes.
Yeah.
And depending on who was involved with it and their availability to come in and for me to be involved with my performance, it was really mostly Kevin and myself, and then Gil Adler would come in, and of course he and Alan Katz were doing a lot of the writing of the
Yeah.
episode. So and the Cryptkeeper sequences were hysterical. I mean, they were each one, and then of course I would crack them up doing, the Cryptkeeper is Marlon Brando, Stella. The next thing I know, like the next season, there is the Cryptkeeper doing Marlon Brando, because they started going, here we have John Kassir, actor, voice actor, stand-up comic, a person we can plug his personality into this character.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, I'm doing Howard Stern, a shock jock, and all this great stuff. And it was really a great group of people to work with, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And which is the reason why it's still around and still appreciated.
Very much so.
We had I got to tell you, Patty, we had no idea that kids were watching this show. And here it is. It has a larger audience now than we thought it had when it was originally on the air, because the people who grew up with the show have grown up with Tales from the Crypt.
In '89, I went to a screening of Walter Hill's Johnny Handsome, and there was Q&A afterwards, and everybody's asking all artsy fartsy questions about it, but I was the last question, and I was like, "Yeah, Mr. Hill, I was wanted to know, we're going to see another season of Tales from the Crypt, and he lit up like, "Oh yeah, the numbers are really good on it, and yeah, matter of fact, I'm going to have a meeting right now. We're going to talk about it. So yeah, thank you. Tales from the Crypt is coming back next season." He actually lowered his sunglasses, that one. So, and the rest is history.
He did some of my favorite episodes too. The Man Who Was Death is still one of the the classic best, and that's why they chose it to be the first episode to air. With William Sattler, and he got Ry Cooder to do the music, and it was just had such a great style to it, and which was just that's the thing, Walter Hill got to do his style with the Tales from the Crypt, but they worked really hard to honor the comic book in any way that they could. They even used some of the frames of the comics as storyboards, in the way that they would shoot it and that kind of thing. Because they'd have like a scene where it was like in Louisiana, and there'd be like Spanish moss, and these, literally these art directors were stealing from the comic book, going, "Well, we don't have any Spanish moss, but if we hang something in the frame really close, we can make it look like Spanish moss." And they, it's like they were doing stuff, obviously when you have no money, budget and that kind of thing, and HBO didn't have a lot of money. They didn't really start spending huge budgets on things until they got to like The Sopranos and stuff.
Yeah, with the double lots. And again, I'm convinced that Tales of the Crypt was a huge leveling up for HBO. I think television in general, because it really showed, okay, this is a horror anthology. You can get kind of R-rated, but you can keep it sane. It wasn't there was gore, but it wasn't gory. It wasn't the slasher films or anything else. It was cheeky. It was fun. And yeah, it remains. People always do a double take when I say, like, no, Tales from the Crypt series is one of the best comic book adaptations of all times.
Oh,
As a series, and the fact that they kept on going, kept that, and I just love the fact that they were able to sneak in some of Two-Fisted Tales into it when they tried to do the pilot, it didn't quite work, but I'm glad they slipped it in anyway. So,
yeah, when they bought the rights to the EC Comics, where they licensed the rights from my brain fart.
Who owned it at the time? I forget. It's Pat. Yeah, whoever owned the rights to EC. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was, he really created the Tales from the Crypt comic books and the
Gaines estate.
Magazine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Bill Gaines, who I had met a number of times, who was amazing and was so amazing to work with and so amazing to me, and even took me to his home where he had, like, his entire house was set up like a museum of horror memorabilia, mostly literature and stuff. Like, you walk through his living room, they look like bookcases of scripts and stuff. But and his family are in touch every once in a while through social media to me and that kind of thing, and they're amazing people. But that all those comics, they bought, like, I think, the rights to 550 stories. Tales from the Crypt, Two-Fisted Tales, Tales from the Vault, I think.
Vault of Horror,
thank you, and some other stuff. And so, they had a lot to choose from. A lot of them were similar, so they were selective in what they did. But I mean, no cable network was doing 93 episodes of anything. We did 93 episodes of that show. And, and to this day, it holds up. People are always like, why isn't it back on the air? Well, we don't have the rights anymore. People wanted to do something different where it wasn't. But ultimately, I don't even know if you could afford to do it the way we did it. But that show was great because it did honor the comic book, and it did bring the comic book to life, or death.
Yeah. So the B side to it, of course, is the Saturday morning series. What was your reaction when you got approached about that?
Well, I had been saying all along, you have to do a version of this for kids, live action. Mm-hmm. And they were like, nah, the networks aren't going to go through. It's too scary. Blah, blah. We don't have a place for it. Blah, blah, blah. Of course, Goosebumps comes on the air. I'm like, I told you, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. They go, don't worry, we've sold a cartoon. And I was like, okay, great. In the cartoon, we did 22 episodes or whatever we did, again, on the cheap, but they did a decent job, I mean, I'm an animation fan, so I'm even Scooby-Doo. I was like, I loved Scooby-Doo. I loved the writing and the characters, but I always thought that animation was just, like, not up to par with what you could do with animation. So it was always tough for me, coming from the era of Looney Tune cartoons and Bugs Bunny cartoon and all this stuff, And
it was Nelvana who did some really good work in the early 80s. I mean, everything from Rock and Roll to Devil and Daniel Mouse. I mean,
Care Bears or something like that. I think. Did they?
Yeah, they did this. They did some independent stuff, and then when they moved into Saturday morning stuff, that kind of fell in that Saturday morning meat grinder, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't get big budgets, and you have to do it the way you can do it. Children's programming never got the money it should for making stuff for kids because they didn't get the advertising dollars either, and that's how it worked on network television and syndicated television. So, but I was really proud of it. In the game show, they wanted me to move to Florida and go do that. I was like, why? For what? I'll record it here, and you'll do it, and you'll play it, and it'll be fine. And they did. Yeah. They shot all the live stuff in Orlando or whatever, every once in a while I'll run into some kid and they go like, I was a contestant on Tales from the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House. I'll be like, wow, it's like mind blowing,
I'm in Orlando and I'm an attractions actor, so yes, I've known some people still around. Oh yeah, I worked on that when I was here. Yeah. So
but,
yeah, but everybody's got good memories of it, though.
That's what it is, and you don't know what you're going to be remembered for in your career. I mean, if somebody said you're going to be remembered, along with, Elvira and Vincent Price and and all these different horror actors, I'd be like, first of all, I love horror. I mean, as a kid, I would die to see any of the Universal horror monster movies when it came on TV. We didn't, of course, have DVDs or streaming or anything. You had to look through the TV guide to see when stuff was going to be played. Um, and and that was all my favorite stuff. So, if somebody had said that to me, I'd be like, really? That would be so cool. But I never would have thought that would have been me. But, I had, as a young actor, you're like, oh, I want to be the next Dustin Hoffman. I want to be the next, whatever. I want to be the next Robert De Niro. You know what? What about me? But, nobody, it's like you are who you are. And, my God-given talents were the ability to play things that aren't on the page, that are, that are huge departures from who I am. I mean, I get to do that too. I mean, obviously I've done all the sitcoms, and, I probably made more of my money at sitcoms, early in my career, but then of course moved on to playing more serious roles and guest stars and all the big CSIs and all that stuff, which was a lot of fun.
And we talked about it before we started the chat, but I mean, again, I think, I love that Three Stooges movie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought you did great. I mean, everybody else in that cast just absolutely nailed it. And it was such an eye opener if you knew nothing about their history and everything else.
Oh, it's great. We had access to home movies. We had access to the family members who were still around. Of course, having Mel Gibson as an executive producer on it didn't hurt in terms of access to whatever we needed, because they wanted us to capture the characters. They could have gotten, they could have gone to Vegas and found the guys who've been impersonating the Stooges for years and stuff like that. But that wouldn't have necessarily brought their life story to life.
Yeah.
We would have been like, oh, look, we're watching the Three Stooges routines, which would have been great, but that's not what they were trying to do here. And, that was an amazing, Jim Frawley, who was the director, who also came from as a stage actor back in the day, who became a director, who kind of reminded me of that Dick Donner type of presence, was our director. And we shot in Australia, which was amazing, because a lot of Australia, we had all these old theaters to play in and all this shoreline that looked like Malibu before it was, developed and that kind of thing. And being Mel Gibson's production company, they brought us to Australia. We had an amazing time shooting it. I mean, having grown up with the Stooges, who wouldn't want to play this? Stooges,
I know. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, John, you've had a really great career. You got a lot of venues. You brought a lot of smiles and a fair amount of chills, not only for myself, but everyone in the audience. So I thank you for your talents. I thank you for your professionalism, and I thank you for all your performances.
Oh, thank you. Without an audience, I'm nobody. I mean, I'd probably be doing this. I'd probably be insane. I'd probably be in a straitjacket doing it for myself. Which is my next show, by the way. But I feel fortunate. And people are like, wow, why do you go to all these conventions and stuff? I was like, because it's better than social media. I would rather see people face to face. I would rather spend time with them. Not only that, I'm a horror fan. I get to see the people who I want to see. I've become friends with some of my biggest heroes, I mean, in terms of horror icons or any part of the business for that matter. I mean, obviously I've not just done horror. That's just happens to be the more, in terms of the convention circuit, that happens to be the bane of the, not bane, but the crux of my most important credits in terms of fan base. And I feel really fortunate for that because I love it. I know there are guys that go to these conventions that are sitting there talking to these fans and they're talking about how they loved him and this and this and this, and they hated that project and they hated that part and they hated that that's the only thing that they're known for. And,
Yeah.
you know, luckily it's not the only thing that I'm known for, but I'm proud to be known for it. If that's all somebody knew me for, I'd still be proud as shit, you know, because it was an amazing project where we worked with the best people in the business and doing something that I loved, and it's still around. You know, I mean, it's around for a reason, and I enjoy doing it.
Absolutely. Again, let's go. We're good to go. Our audience questions. Let's bang out a couple over the next 15 minutes or so. That'd be great. And the first one comes from Nami, who wants to know if you could hang out with any character you portrayed, who would it be and why?
Wow. Well, Deadpool would be awesome to hang out with for all the obvious reasons. But hell, you know, if you're talking about, you know, I mean, we were talking about Shemp. I mean, I would have loved to have hung out with Shemp. These guys were comics during the time where comedians ruled the movie theaters as that kind of comic. I think that I was born in the wrong era sometimes. You know, and for that reason, people were always used to say, who are your heroes? And I used to say, oh, you know, Charlie Chaplin, Dick Van Dyke, Peter Sellers. I mean, you know, these were like the guys that inspired me to be, because I related to them, even Robin Williams later in life. I mean, I remember must have been in high school or college by the time Robin Williams came on the scene. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's, he just stole my career, you know, because you're thinking you think you're special, and then you see Robin Williams and you go, no, that guy is, you know, and you know, not to put down my own work. I mean, people used to go, oh, you're going to be the next Robin Williams. I was like, you can't be the next Robin Williams. I could be John Kassir. Nobody could be the next Robin Williams. You're going to be, you know, but I appreciated, especially when I was back in New York doing theater. When I was doing Three Guys Naked, you know, people were like, oh, you and Bill Irwin and, you know, the guy, David Shiner, you know, who's in Full Moon and all these guys. You guys are the next vaudevillians. And nothing made me prouder than to be grouped, you know, in a group of comics that had that kind of cachet. I mean, everybody, they were trying to rebuild all these careers. My first network pilot was with Sid Caesar. And if you don't know who Sid Caesar is, look him up, because he was the John Belushi of his time. And, you know, and the Chevy Chase of his time. And the, you know, he had it all. And, you know, they paired me up with him because they knew that we could, you know, be that kind of funny together. He was the older comic and I was the younger comic, and it was kind of like a Broadway Danny Rose, where we hung out in the deli with other comics. We had Maurice Hines of the Hines Brothers was one of the clients, and all these great comics were on the show. And you know, I played the young comic amongst all these veterans. And Sid was amazing to work with. He was amazing. But they kept trying to pair me up with all these people. And, you know, like I remember auditioning for the new Carol Burnett show, which was short-lived, but and you can't get better than, you know, in that kind of genre than Carol Burnett. But, you know, I remember doing my Wizard of Oz bit for her and everything in this office. And she was like, oh my God, you're great. You should have your own show. And they didn't hire me. And I was like, no, I know how to play second banana. I can play third, fourth, and fifth banana. Please. I'll do anything to work with you, you know. But that's the pit, you know. You gotta you have to know when to take the back seat. You know, when you're younger, you just like, you think, hey, they want to see everything you can do, you know, and really they just want to see you. And you know, you at the period where you don't even really know who you are, you know. But that's a good question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Nemi. Wonderful. Great to start us off. Hey, what do we have next? From Brandy. Did you have any scary or real ghost encounters on Tales? Or maybe any other point in your life do you think you may have encountered the paranormal?
Oh, boy. I always used to think that I believe, that I believe there were spirits in the room. I know that I loved Frankenstein as a kid. I had a 6-foot cutout of Frankenstein in my bedroom that I swear would get closer to the bed as every time I'd wake up in the middle of the night, it'd be closer than it was.
The Jack Davis one?
It was just it was the cardboard cutout of it.
Okay, yeah.
It was, you could order it. I probably ordered it from the back of a Tales from the Crypt comic book. Along with like the monkey in a teacup and
Teacup, yeah.
the 2-man sub.
Yep.
I like to see what they actually sent you for that.
There's a book called Mail Order Mysteries Revealed, and literally look that up. They show the ad and they show photos of what the thing actually was.
Good stuff. Sea monkeys, the whole deal. But I had some friends in college that lived in an apartment over top a funeral home, and we would, anytime I went in that place, I always felt the presence of something there. On Tales, not so much, I don't think. I did have, it was an amazing night. We did the Horror Hall of Fame, and Robert Englund and I were the hosts.
Yes.
And we were, Vincent Price and Night of the Living Dead. George Romero and other people were getting, Lifetime Achievement Awards, and they were giving us Lifetime Achievement Awards and this kind of thing. And we were the host, and Robert was up front, and they'd cut to the Cryptkeeper me, and now something really scary, a commercial.
Yeah.
We did it on the Conan stage on a Universal lot, and we swear there was all kinds of weird stuff going on with that. But the puppeteers were there working the Cryptkeeper, and I was improvising, which was really tough because normally I would record and then they could practice like a rock video where they could lip sync to what I was doing and act it out. But they had gotten so good playing off each other. I mean, it took 3 guys just to make the face move. And so they got so good at it that like I could look at them, especially Brock Winkles, who was the guy who worked the mouth. I could look at him and I would slow things down a little bit, but he was just maybe that far behind me, but you would never be able to tell watching TV. And he could follow me even though I was improvising.
Yeah.
And we got creepy good at it at that moment when we were doing that show. And we swear there was some kind of weird spirit, like kind of following us and bringing the Cryptkeeper to life.
Well, there you go, Brandy. Thank you. What do we have next? This one from Brian. Who is your favorite horror character?
Besides yours, Ghoulie. No, it's definitely Frankenstein. I loved Frankenstein as a kid. It was, Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein is still one of my favorite movies, and maybe my favorite horror movie. It's a comedy horror movie because it had all the Universal characters in it.
Yep.
They all showed up. And then of course they had the Invisible Man, Abbott and Costello Meets the Invisible Man, and those kind of movies. They were great. But I was so into Frankenstein. I wanted, I had the model, Aurora,
yeah,
model of Frankenstein that I built, and I had Dracula and Wolfman and Phantom of the Opera, and they had, the guillotine. I think we still have the guillotine. I think the rest of them, we probably blew them up with firecrackers in the sandbox, like kids do. Of course, kids go to jail for that kind of thing now. But but Frankenstein was like, I remember watching Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, and there's a scene where they find Frankenstein in a crate, and he's got all the packing, like the little fluffy packing material all around him. I'm like, Mom, you can order a Frankenstein. I got to get one. I thought, for sure. And of course, I wound up with this, cardboard 6-foot Frankenstein in my bedroom,
Yeah. Nice.
Definitely Frankenstein. Thank you.
Awesome. There you go. Brian, thank you. Fun one. What do we have next? And here's one from Kevin. If you could have the Cryptkeeper team up with any other villain, who would you choose?
Oh, boy. God, some of my favorite villains. Oh, it'd be fun to see the Cryptkeeper be a Bond villain. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, it would be funny to see the Cryptkeeper along with, Goldfinger, and it'd be like, well, what do you expect me to do, Goldfinger? Tell him, Cryptkeeper. We expect you to die. That would be a really good one. You expect me to talk, Goldfinger? No, we expect you to die. But that would be great. Cryptkeeper being a Bond villain, or maybe in the
Yeah.
Spy, even more appropriately in the Spy Who Shagged Me,
Yeah.
movies or something.
No,
Have I got a
that's
bone for you?
there you go. Thank you, Kevin. I think we got time for one more. Let's see what we can go on a really fun one. And this comes from Austin. I'm sure you've been asked this before. Do you have a favorite episode?
There's a couple of them. It's hard to pick one other than oils well that ends well.
Of course.
I mean, I always loved that episode. They kept saying they wanted to put me in an episode, kind of like Hitchcock showing up in his movies. And of course, I had actually been cast in one with, oh my God, it was a really good Vietnam episode with Roger Daltrey, which I was like really looking forward to doing it. But then I was on another series and my shooting episode schedule changed and I couldn't do it. And so then they wound up casting me in the Oils Well That Ends Well, which is kind of fun. I get to pop up out of a coffin like the Cryptkeeper, and all this different stuff. There's a point where he's like, this really kind of Fleabag, white trash con man, and got to work with Priscilla Presley and Lou Diamond Phillips, who are great in the episode, along with Rory Calhoun, one of my favorite cowboy stars, and Noble Willingham and Alan Ruck, who's just always great. And so we had a great time working on that episode. And I love that they cut to the Cryptkeeper in the end, and he's going, the other actors were good, but this one is a regular gory Cooper, a Robert Redford, and that voice. I could swear he reminds me of someone I know. But other than that episode, of course, there's Ventriloquist Dummy, because I collected ventriloquist dummies as a kid, and they've always been funny, fun, and creepy all at the same time. They've always been some of my favorites, and I think
Bobcat Goldthwait and
Don Rickles. Don Rickles is amazing. In fact, I have a Morty around here somewhere. I don't know where he is right now, but I actually have a. If anybody wants a photo later with Morty, I have they gave me a kind of a rubberized version of Morty. Nice. Dick Donner directed that episode, and he loved that character so much he had him in a glass case in his office.
Oh wow.
Like the actual puppet that they used in the movie. Death of Some Salesman, that Gil Adler directed with Tim Curry, who is just brilliant. He was nominated for an Emmy for that part where he played Winona and the parents. And and he's just so amazing in it. That's a great episode. Thank you for asking. Those are, there's so many good ones, but those are some of my favorites for sure. Absolutely.
Austin, thank you. Great question. And GalaxyCon viewers, this has been my time with John Kassir. John, this has been an absolute delight. Any final words before we go?
Be careful what you ask for. You may get it.
John, this has been wonderful to host you and your alter ego. Once again, thank you for joining us on the GalaxyCon virtual stage. My pleasure. Thank you, our audience, for joining us today. And thank you for all these great questions. We hope to see you all again soon. Until then, bye-bye, everyone. Take care. And remember that smiles are free, so spend them often.
Patty, we'll be back soon.